Imagine this. You wake up in a room with no walls, no doors, no ceiling, just space, open, vast, unending. There's no threat, no obligation, nothing telling you what to do or who to be. Every direction is yours to explore. Every moment is yours to define. You are, in the truest sense, completely free. And yet your chest tightens, your breath shortens. You feel the unmistakable clutch of panic in your gut. Not because you're trapped, but because you're not. You look around, begging for boundaries, hoping for rules, craving a sign that tells you this is the way. You'd almost prefer a prison. At least then, the architecture would give you something to lean on, something to fight against, something to define yourself by. So you sit down in this boundless room and wait, not for rescue, but for instruction. Why is it that the moment you are handed the keys to absolute freedom, you freeze? Why does the idea of boundless possibility paralyze rather than liberate you? You have failed before, at work, in love, with your health, your dreams. Failure hurts, yes, but it's familiar, predictable. It comes with steps, stages, consequences you can understand. You get knocked down, you get up. You learn, adapt, try again. It stings, but it gives shape to your life. Freedom doesn't. Freedom is terrifying, because in freedom there are no instructions. No one to blame, no one to imitate, no system to rebel against. Only the raw, existential burden of self-authorship. You don't just have to choose what to do, you must choose who to be. And you must live with the haunting possibility that if your life ends empty, there's no one responsible but yourself. What if it's not failure you fear, but the unbearable responsibility of freedom? We glorify freedom, idolize it in movies, speeches, revolutions. We call it the highest human ideal. But in the quiet spaces of our lives, when the world isn't watching, how many of us truly live free? How many people dare to quit the job they hate, and the relationship that's safe but hollow? Speak the truth when it risks being rejected, or reinvent themselves entirely. And those who do, how often are they met with suspicion, even hostility? You've changed. You're being irresponsible. Who do you think you are? Because to live freely is not just to walk a different path. It is to shatter the unspoken contract that keeps society comfortably numb, to defy the narrative that says, stay in your lane, follow the map, keep your head down, be normal. But what if that normal is the cage? What if failure is just the fence we lean on to avoid the terror of possibility? Consider this. A man released from a decades-long prison sentence often struggles to adjust, not because he misses the violence or the cold food or the iron bars, but because for the first time in years, no one is telling him what to do. His days aren't scheduled, his identity isn't assigned. Freedom, instead of feeling like salvation, feels like vertigo. Is it so different for the rest of us? You were born into a world already labeled, structured, and categorized. Before you could walk, you were told what's right and wrong, who you are and aren't, what success means, and how you're expected to pursue it. You were given scripts to follow and consequences if you didn't. You were domesticated, gently, thoroughly, and for your own good. And even now, you measure your life by metrics that were handed to you, not chosen. You chase dreams that don't quite feel like yours. You perform roles that feel increasingly hollow, but you stay because it's safer to walk a path you hate than to stand at the crossroads with no path at all. What if your deepest fear is not that you might fall, but that there's nothing holding you back? What if it's not the pain of failure that keeps you stuck, but the panic of agency? What if you've built your life to avoid the terrifying realization that no one is coming to save you, no one is assigning your meaning, and the prison door was never locked to begin with? This fear, this subtle, invisible dread, haunts the edges of our modern lives. We dress it up in ambition, productivity, loyalty. We tell ourselves we're being responsible. But deep down, some part of you knows you are not afraid of failing. You are afraid of becoming. And if that's true, what does it mean for everything you've built? What happens when the walls around you vanish and you're left with nothing but yourself? Raw, unshaped, unprotected. This is the fear no one talks about. And it's time we did. You were not born afraid of freedom. Watch a child before they're molded, corrected, and warned. They run toward the unknown. They climb too high, ask too much, speak too loudly. They color outside the lines, not out of rebellion, but because they haven't yet been told there are lines. Their essence is not chaos, it is curiosity, not rebellion, but radiance. So what happened? Where did that fearless spark go? The answer lies not in some singular trauma or moment of doubt, but in something deeper, something systemic. It began the moment you realized that certain choices earned you love, and others didn't. Smile for grandma. Don't say that. It's rude. Be good. Don't cry. Say thank you. In these small, repeated moments, you were taught a lesson far more powerful than ABCs or arithmetic. Freedom is dangerous, not explicitly, not with words, but with consequences. To express the fullness of yourself was to risk disconnection. To explore was to risk rejection. So you learned to shrink, to censor, to perform, and you called it maturity. Carl Jung called this process the development of the persona, the mask we wear to survive in society. It is not evil, it is necessary. Without it, we'd be chaos. But over time, the mask fuses to the face. We forget there was ever a difference. We think we are the mask. And worse, we fear what lies beneath it. Jean-Paul Sartre took this further. He believed that freedom was not merely a right, it was a burden, a crushing weight. For Sartre, human beings are condemned to be free, meaning we are thrust into existence without a blueprint. There is no divine instruction manual, no objective path, just us, forced to choose, to act, to define meaning where none is given. And that, he argued, is unbearable for many. It is easier to become an object in someone else's system, a cog, a role, a function, than to be the author of your own soul, because authorship implies responsibility, and responsibility implies guilt. If you succeed, it's on you. If you fail, it's on you. If your life is empty, shallow, unfulfilled, there's no one left to blame. So we outsource our freedom. We hand it off to culture, religion, social norms, even algorithms, anything to escape the mirror of self-authorship. Viktor Frankl, the Holocaust survivor and existential psychologist, once said, "Man's main concern is not to gain pleasure or to avoid pain, but rather to see a meaning in his life." And herein lies the paradox. Meaning requires freedom. But to claim that freedom, we must also claim the terror that comes with it, the vertigo of standing on the edge of infinite possibility, with no map, no guide, and no excuses. And that's where fear rushes in. Not the primal animal fear of tigers or fire, but the existential fear of self-exposure, of accountability, of standing naked before the altar of your own choices and asking, is this really what I wanted or just what was available? Arthur Schopenhauer believed most people avoid this confrontation by seeking distraction. He called it the pendulum between pain and boredom. We chase pleasure to avoid discomfort, then drown in monotony once we have it. Anything to keep us from stillness, from silence, from the slow, crawling realization that we are not living our own lives, but versions of life designed by others. Even the mythologies we cherish reveal our discomfort with freedom. Prometheus is punished for giving fire to mankind. Fire being symbolic not just of survival, but of agency. Adam and Eve are cast out of paradise for seeking knowledge, for daring to taste the fruit of choice. The message is clear: to awaken, to choose, is to suffer. And so we build elaborate systems, schools, jobs, marriages, governments, not just to create order, but to offer us scripts, roles, identities we can inherit rather than invent. The system becomes both our protector and our jailer. It gives us purpose, and in doing so, spares us the agony of having to create our own. But the cost is subtle and devastating. When you live according to someone else's blueprint, even success feels hollow. Even achievement rings false. You climb the ladder only to realize it was leaning against the wrong wall. And worst of all, you stop trusting your own instincts. You stop hearing your own voice. Because to survive within the confines of someone else's expectations, you had to muffle your inner compass. You buried it so deep you forgot it was ever there. And now, when freedom knocks, you hesitate. Not because you lack opportunity, but because you no longer remember how to want, how to choose, how to move without permission. This is not your fault. It is the invisible inheritance of civilization. Aldous Huxley warned of a future where people would be seduced into submission, not by tyranny, but by pleasure, not by force, but by comfort. A world where people would stop reading, not because books were banned, but because they simply didn't care. Where truth would be drowned in irrelevance. In such a world, freedom becomes not a right, but a burden to be outsourced. We don't want to choose. We want to be told what to buy, who to date, what to believe. We scroll, we swipe, we obey. Not because we're weak, but because we were never taught the muscle of self-direction. It atrophied in the shadows of obedience. But here's the danger. When you fear freedom, you become seduced by systems that promise to relieve you of it. You surrender your sovereignty in exchange for certainty, and in doing so, you kill the very part of you that longs to live authentically. So now the question deepens. Not just, why do you fear freedom, but what has your fear of freedom already cost you? What parts of yourself did you abandon to fit in, to survive, to be approved of? And who might you have become if you had been brave enough to choose differently? This is the hidden problem, not fear itself, but the illusion that avoiding freedom is safer than facing it. Saying that compliance is easier than courage. That silence is better than selfhood. But what if that illusion is the true prison? You don't notice it. At first, the fear of freedom doesn't kick down your door or scream in your face. It whispers, slowly, subtly, like a fog that creeps in overnight, so light, so quiet, that you don't realize you're breathing it until everything feels a little heavier, a little dimmer. You go to work, you pay your bills, you smile when expected, laugh when prompted. From the outside, everything looks fine, stable, functional. But beneath the surface, something has gone numb. The fire, the impulse, the hunger that once drove you. It's dulled. You don't even remember what it was you wanted before the world told you what you should want, before you became a participant in a life designed for someone else. This is the cost of fearing freedom. Not sudden catastrophe, but slow erosion. Not the drama of collapse, but the tragedy of unlived potential. There's a concept in neuroscience called learned helplessness, first discovered in experiments where animals were subjected to unavoidable pain. Eventually, even when the path to freedom was clear, they wouldn't escape. Not because the pain didn't matter, but because they had been conditioned to believe escape was impossible. Humans are no different. We endure emotional cages, jobs that drain us, relationships that deaden us, belief systems that shrink us, not because we want to suffer, but because we've come to believe there's no alternative, or worse, that we don't deserve one. Because with freedom comes the confrontation of worth. Am I worthy of a better life, a new story, an authentic self? And if the answer terrifies you, you retreat, not into chaos, but into ritual, routine, the safety of what's known. And over time, the cost compounds. Your creativity wanes. You stop writing, painting, dreaming, not because you lack ideas, but because freedom requires risk, and risk requires belief. Your relationships grow shallow, not because people are boring, but because vulnerability is a kind of exposure that requires a sense of self you're too afraid to show. Even your health suffers because a life unlived expresses itself in the body, in stress, in sickness, in symptoms with no medical name but deep existential roots. You tell yourself you're tired, busy, distracted, but deep down, you know, you are underutilized, underexpressed, undiscovered even by yourself. There's another psychological principle, cognitive dissonance. It describes the mental discomfort we feel when our actions contradict our beliefs. For example, if you believe in truth but keep lying to keep the peace, your mind creates stories to resolve the conflict. You rationalize, you justify, you become fluent in the art of self-deception. And perhaps the greatest self-deception of all is this: I am free. You repeat it like a mantra. After all, you can choose what to eat, where to go, what to watch, what to wear. You have choices on the surface. But freedom is not about consumer options. It's about internal permission. It's not about variety. It's about sovereignty. Ask yourself, when was the last time you made a choice not out of fear, not out of obligation, not out of expectation, but purely out of desire, out of alignment, out of truth? When was the last time you let something die, a habit, a relationship, a job, a belief, because it no longer matched the person you were becoming? Most people don't do this, not because they're weak, but because they're conditioned to fear uncertainty more than inauthenticity, conditioned to see safety as more noble than evolution, conditioned to equate surrender with wisdom. But what if that safety is a slow death? What if the deeper form of failure is not falling short of your goals, but never discovering what they really were in the first place? Culture doesn't help. You are bombarded daily with algorithms trained to numb your intuition. Every scroll, every ad, every like is engineered to pull you outward, away from self-awareness, away from introspection. You are encouraged to consume more than you create, react more than reflect, conform more than confront. Because if you were to truly wake up, to question, to pause, to refuse, you would become unpredictable. And unpredictability is bad for business. So they give you content instead of connection, trends instead of truth, novelty instead of depth. They don't need to control your mind. They only need to keep you distracted from it long enough that you forget it's yours. And what of the people around you? Your fear of freedom doesn't exist in isolation. It seeps into your relationships like poison in a well. You settle for friendships that never ask you who you really are. You remain in romantic relationships where love is traded for comfort or routine or dependency. You parent from anxiety instead of presence. You lead from fear instead of vision. Because to model freedom is to confront your own chains, and that's more terrifying than any argument, any crisis, any truth. And the cruel irony is this: deep down, you crave the very thing you've been taught to avoid. Freedom, not the kind you can buy, but the kind that reorders your life from the inside out. The kind that burns away everything false and leaves you standing raw, exposed, and real. But to taste that freedom, you must first recognize what has been stolen from you, or worse, what you've willingly handed over. So ask yourself now, how much of your life has been lived by default, not design? How many decisions have you made to avoid risk rather than pursue alignment? How many times have you said yes out of fear of being alone, disliked, misunderstood? And most devastating of all, how many times have you said no to yourself? This is not just about you. It's about all of us. Entire systems are built on your compliance. Entire industries profit from your silence. Entire ideologies rely on your fear of standing alone. And so, the moment you stop waiting for permission, everything begins to crack. The moment you say, I don't know where this leads, but I refuse to stay here, you become dangerous. Because a person who no longer fears freedom is a person who cannot be manipulated, cannot be tamed, cannot be broken. But before that power is reclaimed, there is a reckoning. There comes a moment, quiet at first, when the discomfort of the cage outweighs the fear of the unknown. You can't always name it. There's no trumpet sound, no grand epiphany. Just a subtle tightening in your chest when you smile at a job you despise. A jolt of resistance when you agree to a plan you never wanted. A single second of eye contact in the mirror where something ancient and buried stares back at you and whispers, "This isn't it." That's the beginning, not of escape, but of rebellion. Not outward, but inward. Because the true prison isn't the system. It's the belief that you need the system to be safe, to be whole, to be someone. And breaking free begins not with quitting your job or burning bridges, but with dismantling the architecture of obedience built into your psyche. Start here. Permission is a myth. No one is coming to say, you may now begin your real life. No certificate will be issued for authenticity. No badge will be handed to you for choosing your own path. Freedom is not granted, it's seized. That's the first rebellion, to stop waiting for an authority figure to validate your right to exist as you are. You must grant it to yourself. Even when your voice shakes, even when no one claps, even when people say, you've changed. Of course you've changed. You were never meant to stay frozen in a persona crafted for survival. You were meant to evolve, to expand, to shed skins like the seasons. Now listen carefully. The path to freedom is not paved with comfort, it's paved with confrontation. You must confront the lies you told to stay small, the narratives you inherited and never questioned. The people you clung to not out of love, but out of fear of being alone. And the most radical confrontation of all, the possibility that your life could be entirely different, and the only thing in the way is the story you've been telling yourself about what's possible. This is not motivational fluff. This is war, psychological, existential war. And the battlefield is internal. You will have to go back into your childhood, into your memories, into the moments where you learned to associate safety with silence, when you traded your voice for affection, when you dimmed your light so others wouldn't feel small. Rebellion means reclaiming what was lost there, not just hope, not just dreams, but sovereignty, your ability to self-direct, to choose not just your actions, but your desires. You may not even know what you want at first, and that's okay. That's expected, because freedom, for those who have long feared it, can feel like disorientation, like standing at the edge of a vast ocean with no map, no destination, and only a raw compass thudding in your chest. But that compass is sacred. It's the part of you that was never colonized, the part that knows without needing words what feels like truth, even if it doesn't make sense yet. Follow it, even if it leads you away from your current tribe, your current title, your current trajectory, especially then. History has never been changed by those who waited. Revolutions, personal and political, are sparked by those willing to look madness in the face and say, "You may call this foolish, but I will not live as a ghost inside my own life." Think of Rosa Parks, Viktor Frankl, James Baldwin, Simone de Beauvoir, Malcolm X, Frida Kahlo. Every one of them in their own way broke the mold, not because they had no fear, but because they refused to let fear dictate their choices. Their rebellion wasn't rage. It was reclamation of dignity, of identity, of direction. And now it's your turn. But be warned, the system will not applaud. It will shame you, guilt you. It will say you're being selfish. You've changed. You used to be so grounded. What about stability? This isn't who you are. But remember, systems are designed to sustain themselves. Your obedience was never about your happiness. It was about continuity. So don't expect support from the status quo. Expect resistance. Expect loneliness. Expect waves of self-doubt. But also expect the return of your vitality. Expect laughter that doesn't feel rehearsed. Expect ideas that surprise even you. Expect intimacy born from truth, not performance. Because when you begin to live in alignment with your own compass, life stops feeling like a performance and starts feeling like a conversation between your soul and the world. The practical steps, they're simple, brutal, necessary. Say no more often, not as rebellion, but as affirmation of what truly matters. Audit your life, not just your schedule, but your shoulds. Where did they come from? Who benefits from your compliance? Stop asking people who are still in cages for directions to freedom. Create, write, build, move, speak, not for an audience, but for yourself. Not for likes, but for life. Sit in silence. Let discomfort rise. Stop numbing every spark of restlessness. It might just be your freedom calling. Walk away from conversations that shrink you, even if it's awkward, even if they don't understand. This is what real rebellion looks like. It's not loud. It's not glamorous. It's sitting in your car at midnight, crying because you said the truth out loud for the first time. It's walking into a room full of familiar faces and realizing you've outgrown the script they handed you. It's choosing solitude over performance and integrity over applause. You don't owe anyone the version of yourself that made them comfortable. You owe yourself the life you were afraid to imagine. And once you taste even a drop of that freedom, once you feel the spark return to your eyes, the aliveness in your chest, the clarity in your decisions, you will look back on the cage not with nostalgia, but with awe. How did I live there so long? How did I confuse numbness with peace? And most haunting of all, how many others are still asleep inside the same dream, I finally chose to wake from. Imagine this. You've done the work. You've cracked the illusions, confronted the inner machinery that ran on fear, and you've stepped into the wilderness of your own sovereignty. You've let go of what was safe but suffocating. You've started making decisions from alignment rather than anxiety. You feel more alive than you ever have, more you than you ever thought was possible. But then, just when you think you've reached freedom, another paradox emerges, a deeper one, more unsettling than all the others. What if freedom itself is the heaviest burden you will ever carry? You feared failure because it made you feel inadequate. You feared freedom because it makes you feel responsible. No more blaming the job. No more blaming your parents. No more blaming the system, the relationship, the society, the algorithm, the expectations. With true freedom, there is no one left to point to. The mirror doesn't blink. And for the first time, the reflection stares back at you and asks, now that you are free, what will you do with it? This is the ultimate truth. Freedom doesn't feel like euphoria. It feels like accountability. That's why most people flirt with it, but never fully commit. Because freedom reveals you. Not just the light, but the shadows. You can no longer hide behind excuses. You must face your potential and the terrifying fact that you may never rise to meet it unless you choose to, every day, relentlessly, without applause. And in that silence where there is no one left to please or blame, you meet yourself. Not the curated self, but the one who has been watching all along. The one who remembers every compromise, every betrayal of your own soul. Every time you said yes when your whole being screamed no, and it asks, are you ready to stop hiding? Are you ready to carry the weight of your own becoming? Because freedom is not light. It is gravity. It pulls you inward. It demands you build a life with no blueprint but your own. Viktor Frankl wrote, freedom is only part of the story and half the truth. Freedom is but the negative aspect of the whole, whose positive aspect is responsibility. Freedom is not the goal. It is the gateway. To choose your purpose, to choose your values, to choose your pain, to choose your impact. Most people fear failure because they think it means loss. But failure is honest. It hurts, yes, but it teaches. Freedom, by contrast, is silent. It waits for you to give it meaning. It does not scream. It does not guide. It simply asks, day after day, what will you build with this gift I have handed you? And the cruel kindness of freedom is that it doesn't care what you choose. You can squander it. You can rise with it. You can ignore it. But it will be yours. Always yours. That's the weight. So what now? Now you stop searching for a finish line. You stop waiting for clarity to precede movement. You stop romanticizing the idea that once you're free, everything will feel easy. Freedom isn't easy. It's a daily choice, a discipline, a dialogue between you and the unknown. It means showing up without a mask, even when you're terrified of being seen. It means choosing alignment over approval, even if it costs you comfort, company, or control. It means saying, I may not know the outcome, but I will no longer betray myself to avoid uncertainty. And that is the most sacred act a human being can commit, not chasing perfection, not avoiding failure, but choosing to live fully awake. Because here's the secret. You never truly feared failure. You feared what failure would reveal, that you'd been holding back, that you'd never really tried. You feared having no more excuses. But now that you're here, now that all the stories have been stripped away, you realize something else. You were never really afraid of falling. You were afraid of flying, of becoming someone so different, so powerful, so alive, that the old version of you, the one who played small to stay safe, would weep at the sight of what was possible. And now, let me ask you, what happens to a person who no longer fears being misunderstood, who no longer needs validation to act, who no longer asks for permission to exist? They become dangerous, not to others, but to the systems that rely on compliance. They become magnetic, not through performance, but through presence. They become whole. And when you become whole, your very existence becomes a rebellion, not because you're loud, not because you're trying to prove anything, but because you've stopped pretending, you've stopped shrinking, you've stopped lying. And that kind of person, one who walks through the world without apology, without armor, and without allegiance to fear, is the rarest thing in existence. A free human. So here we are, at the edge of the last illusion, and the final question is not, what if you fail? The real question is, what if you succeed, and everything safe and familiar burns away in the process? What if you become someone unrecognizable to those who once loved your performance? What if you build a life so true, it renders your former self a ghost? Could you handle that level of change, that depth of truth, that height of flight? Because here's the most paradoxical truth of all. You don't fear failure. You never did. You fear becoming free and realizing the cage was always unlocked. You fear the grief of lost time. You fear the responsibility of self-authorship. You fear the power that comes when there's no one left to blame. But that fear, it's not your enemy. It's the doorway. Walk through it. And on the other side, don't expect peace. Expect presence. Expect power. Expect the wild, aching beauty of a life you chose. One you created, one you claimed. And if anyone asks what changed, just smile and say, I stopped fearing the truth more than I feared the unknown. Because once you do that, you are no longer a prisoner. You are no longer asleep. You are no longer waiting. You are free.